What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
What's up, Fantasy Points? It is, in the words of Scott Barrett, go time. This is Outside the Box, week 15. We're going to be going position by position, looking at the chalk, finding some plays that we like that are more contrarian at each position. I am here, as usual, with the master of dank stats, Scott Barrett, CEO of Fantasy Points. Scott, how are you doing this Saturday?
I'm doing good. I'm doing a lot better than you, Neil. Neil is sick with COVID. Michael Jordan flu game from Neil.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that Thursday Night Football was supposed to be my flu game. Did not end up being my flu game. So this one kind of has to be, by default, this is my flu game. I was supposed to be doing the show from Nashville, from a hotel room in Nashville. Instead, I am at home. The good news is we do have heat and hot water. We did not for 24 hours, which when I'm sick, like one of my few comforts is a nice hot shower. So not having hot water or heat for 24 hours, especially when it was like negative degrees here in Minnesota, was not fun for a little while. But we have our heat and hot water back. We had a scare, a gas leak scare at home, which is why we had to shut off the heat and hot water. But it is back on, good to go. You know, starting to feel a little bit better. Still not feeling great, but we're getting better, and happy to be here, of course, with Scott as usual. How are you feeling about this slate?
I mean, it's a bit of a tricky one. There's like 10 quarterbacks in play, which feels abnormally high. Chalk seems pretty good. Pretty good, I'd say.
Oh, and I see somebody mentioning best ball, so I got to ask, have you looked at your best ball teams yet, your advancing teams?
No, I haven't. And you're the only one who knows my handle. So if you've looked at it, don't tell me. I'll check in week 17. Otherwise, I'm not going to get my hopes up.
All right. I have not looked at your teams. My teams is pretty bleak. I have a few, particularly on DraftKings, that I think could be live, but we'll see. Yeah, not really worth looking until like the end of week 16. Anyway,
83%, Neil. 83% of all teams that drafted Jamar Chase and Saquon Barkley advanced to this stage. That's the impact of power law players. All these perfectly correlated teams without these must-own players getting destroyed. So good season for my personal philosophy with best ball, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, listen, if I was good at identifying power law players, I would just take all the power law players. Also, that's not my strength. So maybe I just need to do more shows with you next year, because I had really good advance rates with my friends, you, Jake, D-Bro, the guys who are good at identifying power law players. So maybe that is what I need to incorporate more, is more of you guys, the true ball knowers, the elite ball knowers out there. But enough about best ball. Let's get into this slate. We'll start at quarterbacks as usual. Let me sort by quarterbacks here. Kyler Murray getting the most ownership on the slate, projected for 15% ownership against the Patriots. How are we feeling about Kyler this week?
Yeah, I mean, he's the recommended cash quarterback this week just because of, fantasy points per dollar, highest among quarterbacks for us. I do not feel good about 15% ownership for Kyler Murray. I do not feel good about 14% ownership for Justin Herbert. Primarily due to that ownership percentage for tournaments. So I'm really fine kind of fading both of them. Kyler just kind of, it's a down year for him. This might be a career low by fantasy points per game. He's not rushing anywhere near as much as he used to. In this regime with this offense, ranked bottom 3 in pass rate over expectation. Last year, I think bottom 5. This year, it's come up in recent weeks. I don't know how much we can trust that, but it's a great matchup. He just seems to kind of like explode randomly without any rhyme or reason to when he goes off. I don't know. Like I said, it's a great matchup, especially with the Patriots decimated by injuries. But I'm fine fading him for tournaments.
Yeah, I'm really surprised to see that Kyler is getting this much ownership. This feels like it is a very 2024 thing, that even though he hasn't been playing that great, he's still getting this much ownership. I would love to lean in on Kyler. I don't know that I'm going to be able to if this ownership does hold. And you say the same thing about Justin Herbert?
Yeah. So I can't get excited about a 14% owned Justin Herbert. He has 2 games over 20 DK fantasy points this year. So sort of where's the upside? I get that it's an elite matchup. Hopefully Ladd McConkey's back to full health. But he also picked up what a lot of injury experts think are a high ankle sprain, which would really sap him of his rushing upside, which has been like a nice little boost over the second half of the season. But yeah, neither really is a guy who strikes fear into my heart. So I'm totally okay full fading the both of them.
Yeah, and I do think we have some other pretty intriguing options at quarterback also, as you already alluded to, which makes it a little bit easier to get away from the chalk. Herbert, like a couple of weeks ago, we were looking at like trends, or I was looking at trends at least. I assume you were also, where it was looking like, okay, over the past 5 weeks or whatever, he was awesome. And that was back-to-back duds. So it was looking like, okay, it's running a little bit more. They're throwing a little bit more in general. Like they're just really like leaning on Herbert. And then just the past couple of weeks have been like 7 fantasy points and 11. I don't remember what the exact numbers, but like really big duds the past couple of weeks. So kind of it's reverted back to the average there. Let's open it up. So beyond Murray and Herbert, nobody else getting over 7% ownership. So everybody else fairly contrarian relative to those two. Do you want to just tell me who some of your favorite plays are?
I mean, we could just go down the list because these guys are great, especially relative to the top 2. Joe Burrow is, far and away the best quarterback playing football right now over these last, 300 plus yards, 3+ touchdowns in 4 straight games, at least 25 DK and 5 straight, averages nearly 30. Cincinnati's defense is so bad. They're almost as bad as Cincinnati's offense is good. And I think really that's what it comes down to this week is this just going to be a Chase Brown game, or can Tennessee actually push Cincinnati here? And to me, this feels like the opposite of when an unstoppable force meets an unmovable object. But yeah, that's really what's so exciting about Burrow and Will Levis. I don't know where Will Levis checks in. I'm a little worried about him because he just flopped in a top 2 matchup against Jacksonville. He injured his shoulder and he always looks shaky. He looked by far the worst we've seen him in a really long time. But there's just so much upside to the quarterback plus the stack if this game does pop, right? If this were just about any other quarterback, really high certainty it would pop. We've seen lesser quarterbacks, really go off against Cincinnati's defense, but it's you look at Jamar Chase, who is outscoring the next closest wide receiver by like 15 fantasy points per game over the last 5 weeks or so. And then you have T. Higgins, who's actually beating him out by first read targets over the last 7 games he played together. Really productive, clearly one of the top values of the slate from a projection standpoint. And then you look at Calvin Ridley, who's also popping as a top value, gets a ton of air yards, has that upside. Even Nick Westbrook-Akina, who's had more spike weeks than Ridley over the last, 6 or so games, has scored a touchdown in like 6 of his last 8. So there's just so much upside to that stack if this game pops, really coming down to if we can trust Tennessee's offense as bad as Cincinnati's defense has been.
Yeah, and you were, as I recall, big on the Cincinnati stacks all summer, which, man, that worked out well if you played a lot of Burrow with either really of Higgins or obviously particularly Chase, but that worked out very well. And yeah, any week it looks like they could absolutely destroy the slate. Coming in at just 7% ownership feels pretty good there.
Knowing me, I probably have more Jamar Chase stacked with Jaden Daniels than I do Joe Burrow, but yeah, liked Burrow a lot.
Trey thinks that my audio is not coming from my mic. So does that mean that you guys are hearing me every time I mute myself? Are you hearing me like doing nasally stuff? Hopefully not. I don't know. I think I'm muting myself. All right, I'll have to change where my audio is coming from. But let's move down off of
what's that thing called where people like talk into the microphone? ASMR. Yeah. Trey, can you cut up an ASMR of Neil doing nasally stuff?
Yeah. Hopefully you're not. I don't think you're hearing it because if I mute myself, I'm probably muted.
Ooh, something just happened with your mic and you sound crystal clear.
I don't know why this happened on the last stream I was on too. for whatever reason, it's defaulting back to my, I don't know, some other audio. I don't even know what it is because I'm on a desktop, so I don't know where the other audio is, but I have fixed it. Okay. All right.
So walking down that list,
Yeah.
and so Joe Burrow, again, 25 plus DK in 5 straight, nearly 30 draft. Like, this is generationally good, sophomore season Lamar Jackson type numbers, but you could say the same thing about Tua. And 7% seems high to me just because I haven't heard this argument too much. It seemed like he was kind of slipping under the radar, but he's hit 23.5 in 4 straight games, averages 27.4. That'd be about 2 points more than Lamar Jackson's position high. And really what you're seeing is Miami's offense looks as good as it's always been under Mike McDaniel, except typically they're ranking top 3 in yards per carry, right? Now they rank bottom 3. And so they're sort of abandoning the running game in favor of these designed targets, manufactured touches, short passing game, quick dump offs going to Jonnu Smith and Devon Achane, although we did see Jalen Waddle get a little bit more of that last week. The matchup looks favorable. It looks, fringe top 12 by schedule adjusted, whether over the full season or the last 12 games. And you're seeing all of Miami's receivers project to go low owned this week. I personally like Jonnu. I feel like that's a little bit of a controversial call or a boom or bust pick, but that's my lean. Yeah, it's just 6,100 for a guy who's been incredible. And it seems like not many people have really paid attention to that.
Yeah, I see. Because I'm muting myself, I had to find my way back to the screen. Usually I start talking after you say something, and then I get back to the screen. I had to wait there. Yeah, Jonnu, looks like a great matchup for tight ends against Houston. Everything looks pretty good there. Josh Allen, probably one of, and you asked me whether we talked about Josh Allen on the stream last week. I don't remember talking about him. Not somebody that I had a ton of interest in last week. Probably one of the biggest misses of either of our careers to not talk about a 54-point Josh Allen. I don't think anybody really, as far as I saw or heard, nobody was really talking about Josh Allen last week. He's always so hard because who are you going to stack him with? He goes off for 54 points. I don't even know. I think Khalil Shakir had a big game. I actually don't even remember. Did Amari Cooper? He had 16 targets. So I assume he had a pretty big game. But typically it's even if Josh Allen puts up 30 fantasy points, doesn't bring anybody along with him, and he's expensive, you don't really need it. So it's sort of tough. But when he puts up 54, it's tough to overcome that number. How are we feeling about Josh Allen this week?
Yeah. So if you had asked me about him, I would have said he doesn't project great. I worry about the Rams being able to push the Bills, but what you see with these, MVP front runners is they could just randomly explode for a 5 touchdown game in the second half of the year. I kind of didn't really trust the Rams keep owning me. I keep playing them in the wrong weeks. They flopped they couldn't get anything going against the Saints, which is a bad defense. And then they went crazy against the Bills. But yeah, you saw that not just a 5 touchdown game, a 6 touchdown game from Josh Allen in a game that they got pushed. This was the most fantasy points by any quarterback in NFL history, surpassing George Blanda in 1961. So really long-standing record that he broke. I was top 7 in a tournament and the only one to have Zach Charbonnet left. And he goes for 30 points in the first quarter and a half. And I'm feeling good. Nope. Josh Allen came out and that was a fun sweat, but Josh Allen came out and wrecked my soul. All those afternoon games went off. And so this is what we've always said with Josh Allen is it really comes down to whether or not the Bills can get pushed. When Buffalo gets pushed, they ask him to be Superman. And because he's Superman, he delivers. And really, this is the perfect matchup for that. This is the highest over under of any game in any week this season. It's a close shootout spread. And like I said, in these close games is decided by 4 or fewer points this year. He's averaging 31.6 DraftKings fantasy points per game. He's hit 20 in 8 straight, averages 27.6. And it's just clear, no one has as much upside as the guy who just scored the most fantasy points in NFL history. And this would be the spot for it. Buffalo is a tough matchup on paper, but they can really push. It is a tough matchup on paper, but I don't know. You dig into the schematics. Detroit, very man heavy. They've struggled probably most of any defense against mobile quarterbacks since Aaron Glenn has joined this regime. And like, that's by design. And I kind of think that's how they're going to play Buffalo. I think, it's against these receivers. Yeah. Why not play man coverage and just hope Josh Allen doesn't go nuclear with his legs? But that's the thing, is like, he can pretty easily go nuclear with his legs. So 8,500 is probably not too priced in line with the guy who, again, just broke George Blanda's 60-year record. It might feel point chasey, but like 6%, he should probably be higher than that.
Yeah, seems like a reasonable amount of ownership to pay for a guy like Josh Allen. You also just reminded me, Scott, that last week we built a lineup on the stream, and we thought about. I brought up we could have made a swap,
right?
We could have made a swap off of Kirk Cousins and Drake London to Darnell Mooney and Sam Darnold. And if we had made that swap, there was a point during the afternoon games where we would have been 12th in the millie with Zach
Wow.
Charbonnet. We only had one player left, and it was Zach Charbonnet. So even if we had made that swap, we weren't really live to. We were going to move back rather than forward. But then obviously Josh Allen just completely blew that up. Anyway,
can you add insult to injury by bringing up Stephen Leibowitz's comment?
The Blanda one? You played Blanda that week? I mean, that's Steven's older than I am. I mean, come on.
All right,
he can't make old jokes at me.
Yeah, come on, Steve.
It's kind of funny though. Yeah, I think Alan, you made the case for him. Bo Nix, do we want to keep going down the list, or
we can keep going down the list? Okay. Nix, he kind of just missed the bubble for me in terms of getting a write up, and I don't know if that's just because like due to fatigue from writing up so many quarterbacks and like deleting a good chunk of those already. Ryan made some persuasive arguments for him. Really, like a key note for Nix is just that he is one of the most pressure sensitive quarterbacks. This doesn't look like a spot where he's going to face a lot of pressure. And like, he's been awesome for, ever since, Denver really flipped a switch in like week 6 or so. Cortland Sutton has been awesome. So the stack is easy. Indianapolis still isn't like a great matchup for me. We talked about DeForest Buckner being back, but more than anything, it's just the really slow down play volume. So ultimately he didn't crack my list. I'm okay with that. But like I said, this is like a weird week where there's like 10 quarterbacks in play this week. I'm excited to track. I'm sorry you couldn't go, Neil. And shout out to all our friends who are there. But I'm excited to track and see what a quarterback exposure looks like from all these players in the championship out in Nashville this week.
I'll definitely be tracking it, of course, from home. Looks like, man, it's going to be a fun event. Tons of people there in Nashville. A lot of great players in that contest. So it will be fun to see how that goes.
You should have just rode with Hishbu anyway, and Hishbu could have wore a hazmat suit, and you could have infected everyone else, and their play suffered. Biological warfare from Hishbu. Come on.
So I was actually not going as Hishbu's guest this year. He's not going. He's in it, but he has young kids, so he's staying home. I was going to be Sully Bro Chill's guest this week. So obviously I'm cheering for Sully to win this one. Whoever invites me that year, that is going to be the person that I am cheering for. But yeah, I have, of course, a lot of people that I am rooting for in the event. But this year it's Sully Bro Chill because I was going to be his guest. CJ Stroud has not really been great from a fantasy standpoint, but the pass rate in neutral pass situations, just as they're up to like 4th over the past 4 or 5 weeks, something like that, projects really well. I had to dig into this because I was like, why is CJ Stroud projecting so well everywhere when it doesn't look like it's a great matchup? I don't know. How do you feel about CJ Stroud? And can you further explain it? Does it go beyond just like the pass rate has come up in recent weeks?
No, I think it's dumb when he's 100 more than Tua, and Tua's putting up Lamar Jackson numbers over his last 5 weeks, and CJ Stroud hasn't done anything all year. I will say, it looks like a good matchup. Stroud, like no one talks about this, but he's like Ben Roethlisberger levels of like sensitivity to home road splits. Totally different quarterback at home, and you see that with Nico Collins. Might be a dome merchant. I got to pull up the stats and tweet it out. But that's my suspicion. But no, like he didn't warrant a write up to me. I think Tua is just the much better play. Just Stroud's kind of sucked this year, and Tua has been Lamar Jackson levels of good.
I'm just somebody just asked me if I could increase my mic input volume. I'm wondering if he's just at the beginning of the video. Does anybody just have an issue with my mic volume? Just let me know if there's anything else I need to do. Okay. So not a huge fan of Stroud when you have Tua there. Anthony Richardson, we going back there, 5,800.
He's kind of always in play, just because of like he is the archetypal GPP play quarterback. He's scored over 27 DraftKings fantasy points in 30% of his career games. Nothing else really stands out. It's just kind of that. Maybe he has one of those games. He's not high on my list. He's not someone I'm super excited about, but 30% chance at 27 DK at that price is pretty solid.
Do we want to keep going down the list, or do you have?
Yeah, we can keep going. So,
all right, so
Jared Goff. I mean, it's just highest over under of any game this season. It's 6 points higher than anything else. So, massive upside to this game. Should not be 5%. Like even if this were Aiden O'Connell or Desmond Rizzler, I would say the same thing. But it's Jared Goff, who, has played really well this year, ranks top 10 in fantasy points per dropback. It's just pass volume isn't high, because they don't typically get pushed, but this is again, a game that should pop, should go off, should get pushed. Personally, I'm more excited about the running backs and maybe Josh Allen, even at the greater price, but certainly warranted a conversation. And then to go further down the list, one spot, a quarterback, I'm extremely excited to talk about every single week, Jameis Winston. If he was 15% owned, I would have similar levels of excitement. It's my guy. I've waited, since week 3 to start Jameis Winston. I'm going to have exposure every single week. He has scored over 4x his current salary in half of his games this season. Went off against Denver, which was a bottom 3 matchup. Steelers are kind of different because they're far and away the toughest defense for quarterbacks. But outside of Steelers games, he's averaging 365 passing yards per game, 27.3 DraftKings fantasy points per start. When you're talking about like nearly 400 passing yards, like there is massive upside to the stack. And Denver receivers are not priced like it, especially with David Njoku questionable, Cedric Tillman still out. Massive upside to this stack. People are going to see Kansas City and say that's a tough matchup. I would not say that with any level of certainty. They actually rank bottom 7 in adjusted net yards per attempt allowed since week 8. They've had a pillow soft strength of schedule over that span. They were giving up like AOC's best ever game of his career, other guys going off against them. Ultimately, it's just Jameis Winston. I fucking love him so much. Massive upside to the stack. So probably my favorite GPP quarterback of the slate. There is volatility here. That always comes with Jameis, but it's volatility I want to be leaning into. Yeah, weather is a bit of a concern. 90% chance of rain. I don't know how damaging that rain is going to be. Wind speeds typically matter more to me. I saw a high of 15 when I checked yesterday. Today, it might have been 15 to 18. Still, when we're talking about 5,500 price tag, 6% ownership in a game, they're going to have to pass. I feel really good about Jameis nonetheless.
Yeah, Jameis has also been my biggest stand of the week.
that disappoints me a little bit that there is weather. I feel like there's at least one other spot, the Sam Laporta week, where I was super excited about Sam Laporta, and then it was like, oh, there's terrible weather in that game, which I did not realize. So that, it's a little bit of a damper on things.
And you saw in the first half of that 49ers game just how impactful weather can be. The Thursday night game,
it can be huge. Looking at Jameis's projections around, I think this is actually the highest projection I've seen on Jameis by like 2 full fantasy points, this 17.7. But I was looking at the other projection. I was like, how does he project this poorly? He's throwing 45 times a game. Like, he put up 36 and 26 fantasy points in a couple games. Just like, you're like projecting him at his absolute floor. So I'm glad to see this is like more in line with how I view Jameis. And of course, I've never done projections, so like the people doing them obviously are going to be better at it than I am. But just like, man, this feels wrong to me that he's projecting like really, really poorly for a guy who throws it every time he touches the ball. So this is I'm with you. And also tough to know what to make of Cedric Tillman being out and potentially David Njoku being out also. Obviously like makes things harder for Jameis, but also makes it easier to stack. We'll get into the stacking options later on, but love to hear that you are back on Jameis again this week. Do you want to continue moving down Drake?
No, probably not. I will say Jaden Daniels, I think, is sneaky. I talked about Burrow being insane over the last X weeks, Tua being insane over the last X weeks, and Jaden Daniels, it's kind of the same thing. He had that rib injury that bothered him from week 7 through 11. Also in there was a game he had like a wound that split open and had to get super glued shut, and that was to his throwing hand. So anyway, just outside of that stretch where he was dealing with the injuries and he was running less because of the injuries, 20.5 fantasy points in 7 to 8 games, averaging 25, top 3 in fantasy points per drop back. Basically, he's just like right up there with Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts in my eyes, but he's about 500 to 1K cheaper. I know New Orleans probably isn't going to push them here. But Tennessee didn't do that, and he dropped 30 with these mobile quarterbacks. He could always take one into the end zone. So I think he's getting a little forgotten. Lamar Jackson too. My lean was Jaden, but it's kind of the same exact thing. People are going to dismiss this, but there's like legitimate times where Lamar Jackson reached 30 DraftKings fantasy points at halftime and then like shut things down and like still finished as one of the top scoring quarterbacks of the week. And you never know, they could kind of lean more aggressive than people think. To me, it's just like the ultimate Derrick Henry game, and that's how I'm going to play it. But you never know. Script like 16-point favorites with these mobile quarterbacks, you can run touchdowns. It's sort of a different story. And then I have one gross quarterback I'm excited. We should, by the way, Baker Mayfield in play every single week, but didn't make the write up this week. I'm worried about that Mike Evans injury. And again, there's just so many quarterbacks in play. I have one last gross quarterback I'm legitimately excited about. Do you want to guess who it is, Neil?
I do want to guess who it is. I think you've already said it's not Will Levis, right? We went over the Levis side of things. So it comes down to, I think, one of 3 quarterbacks that it could be. It could be Cooper Rush. It could be Aaron Rodgers, or it could be Bryce Young. I'm going to guess you're thinking of Bryce Young.
No, it's not. He is interesting though, because Dallas is dealing with some injuries to their secondary. He won a slate 2 weeks ago, right? And it's clear leverage on the running backs in this game, which are super chalky. So that's actually a pretty good call. Ultimately didn't make my cut, but I think it's interesting. To me, it's Aaron Rodgers. It's just that this offense is basically like if the Rams and the Bengals were really bad, with how hyper condensed it is between the 2 wide receivers, perhaps especially now with the running back hurt. Since week 9, Adams leads all players in target share. Garrett Wilson ranks top 12. And so everything is so condensed around them. And it's, if the Jets were like just average instead of sucking ass, they could easily post some like slate breaking scores. So I like the dub stack component. We saw this last week. Aaron Rodgers threw for 339 yards, which I think was like his most in like 4 years, which is so pathetic. But look at what happened. Both receivers cleared 100 yards and 21 fantasy points for Wilson, 29 for Adams. And it's just like a best possible matchup against Jacksonville. They were number one far and away by schedule adjusted before Levis last week. Again, I think that was more the shoulder injury. I think this is still probably, them. I mean, that's a good, clear top three. Tampa, Jacksonville, Cincinnati defenses all suck. And so, maybe it happens this week. It was a little inspiring. He looked pretty decent last week. So just underrated upside to that stack at a cheap price.
I'm guessing you did not catch the cage match this week where I took Aaron Rodgers double stack with the two top guys. Yeah. So I'm hoping that Aaron Rodgers is not disgusting this week.
I just want to know who Jake played so we could fade them.
You think I remember who Jake played? Do you think I pay any attention to who Jake takes in the cage match? Do I want to learn how to lose at the cage match? I mean, come on. No idea who Jake took.
Damn.
Let's see. Do I have any other players that we need to talk about? I feel like you brought up the names that people are going to. People brought up Tommy DeVito. I don't think we have to worry about Tommy DeVito. Even it's a good matchup, pass funnel, Baltimore defense, but
there was a tweet from the Giants beat writer that the Giants threw 16 times in practice and completed 0 passes. And the beat writer is like, I don't think I've ever seen that in my life. And I don't think I would have ever believed it if I heard someone else say it. I'm like, that's my Giants. That's kind of what we're looking at.
Yeah. Jake has not popped up in chat since I saw. The funny thing is I talk trash about Jake. He retweets this show whenever we go on, and I still talk trash about him during the show because that's kind of the nature of the cage match, right? You gotta be talking trash. That's the fun of it. All right. I think that's it as far as any quarterbacks that are interesting. We don't need to go to Hurts or Wilson or. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about running backs. All right, I'm gonna refresh this.
Click on ownership first.
Oh, shoot. It worked.
Right,
Fixed.
Nice.
Okay. Chuba Hubbard is the chalk. 36% ownership going to Chuba Hubbard at 6,500. How are we feeling about it?
I think you have to feel good. This was like a spot I circled in the Everything Report a number of weeks ago. He's a lot more game script sensitive than he gets credit for. I know he's a bell cow, gets a ton of snaps, ton of carries, ton of targets. But he's been very game script sensitive. In wins this year, they've only had 3, averages 27 DraftKings fantasy points per game. I think those are 3 of his 4 highest scores of the season. And this is a game they're favored to win by 3 points. It's a good favorable matchup. I will say it's only a 3-point spread. And so if Dallas wins this game, perhaps leads throughout, I could just as easily see Rico Dowdle going off. And, Rico Dowdle, unfortunately, isn't leverage at 22%, but he deserves a shout out. Over their last 3 games, he's averaging nearly 110 rushing yards per game, 16 fantasy points per game, 70% snap share. Role has climbed each week. And again, like Hubbard, to me, he's very game script sensitive. Snap share drops to just 43% when trailing, minimal usage. But it is a best possible matchup. You look at schedule adjusted rushing fantasy points per game allowed to running backs. Carolina far and away the best matchup to opposing running backs. So that is great for him. He could get there anyway with negative game script. And then there's also the chance that he gets positive game script. Johnny might disagree. I'm kind of curious to hear his thoughts. I don't think you can play both running backs in cash. I don't think I'd want to play both running backs in the same GP. Well, primarily just due to the ownership. And I think I'd want to stack, or I'd be inclined to stack with the defense for whichever running back I play. But no doubt when talking about point per dollar, they're strong plays. Hubbard's my clear preference. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm debating whether I think you can play both in cash. I'm not sure that that's the first lineup that I would build with both of those guys in there, but
Right.
it's more for me a concern in GPPs, the negative correlation of opposing running backs. Like I don't love that because it just slows the game down too much. Excuse me, but I think in cash it's a little bit more viable.
Yeah,
I'm
that
about to-
Bryce angle is interesting. Now, the more I think about it, like what if it's a shootout and Thielen and CeeDee Lamb were the plays you need and they combine for 3% ownership, but that's just a milli play.
Yeah, definitely a milli play. Rachaad White, obviously we don't know Bucky Irving status. Do you have any read on the Bucky Irving status?
I do not have any read. I wrote it up like if he's out, Rachaad White, a clear top 3 running back play of the slate. You can talk about like, oh, maybe Tucker's more involved. I mean, maybe he's a milli play, right? We've seen that before. But it's just there's so much upside to this backfield. This is basically like it's most valuable backfields in fantasy: 1, Detroit; 2, Tampa, where even if he just gets 65% of the work, that would be top 3 XFP on the week. So really great spot for Rachaad White, heavily involved in the passing game. So there's no game script sensitivity. And, maybe he gets more than 65%. You saw last week, he was at 80% snap share, 80% of the backfield XFP after Irving left the game. So really an elite play. I don't know what's up with Irving. Seems genuinely questionable. If he plays, he's probably going to be limited. But Rachaad White would probably no longer be a top 3 play.
You mean in terms of ownership? So the ownership would come down. Do you think he would still be somebody you would have interest in a GPP if Bucky Irving is active and we don't know like his limitations?
I think there's probably better plays, but I could see him hitting.
Okay. James Conner, number 3 in ownership. So both Kyler and Connor getting significant ownership. Do you
they're massively correlated together. 40% positive correlation together this season, which is really huge for a running back and a quarterback. You've seen his usage really start to trend up. Troy Benson only had 2 opportunities last week. Connor had 22 with a 75% snap share. Now Amari DeMarcado's out. That's good for about 7 routes, maybe 1.5 targets, makes them a little less game script sensitive. Not that was a concern this week. New England's a really good matchup. Game script really favorable. I definitely see why he's projecting so well. I will just say, like, you could argue the upside's more questionable than a 22% ownership would suggest. He hasn't gone over 4x his current salary in any games this season. But it does look like the spot for it if there was one.
Chase Brown, number 5 in ownership. Is the usage just too good for Chase Brown, or are we afraid of the matchup at all? How do you feel about 21% there?
Yeah, honestly, he might be my favorite of these top 5 at ownership. Just the usage is so like it's nearly like Christian McCaffrey levels of good, like vintage prime CMC. He's had an 80% snap share and 19 plus fantasy points in every game since Zach Moss was ruled out for the year. Would lead all running backs in XFP per game, routes per game, targets per game, behind only Saquon in fantasy points per game. So just like undeniably elite usage, maybe the best usage of any running back on the slate. And he's priced as the RB7. And Cincinnati has maybe the best offense, and certainly the most productive offense over the last 5 or so weeks. It's just because their defense is so bad, you generally see more from the pass. But as 5-point favorites, like this is a good spot to see them lean heavier on Chase Brown. And so, like, again, he's been super productive, 19 fantasy points, but it's also with like him barely being involved in the second half because they're trailing. They have to put points up on the board and do it quickly. That I don't think we've really seen a ceiling. And I think we could see it this week.
Yeah, absolutely. Looks great. Joe Mixon next up, and then Derrick Henry. You already kind of alluded to being a play that you love, but let's talk about Mixon first. Any interest in Mixon? You're going to use him as the bring back in your Miami stacks?
Well, it's him or Nico, right? I might prefer Nico, but yeah, he's just like rock solidly awesome. He's had 100 plus rushing yards and a rushing touchdown in 7 of 9 full games this year. That is insane. The only 2 games where he didn't do that were losses in bottom 6 matchups. This is a perfectly neutral matchup. Houston is favored, albeit a 60% implied win probability. So it's a little tight. But in Texans victories this year, he averages nearly 30 DraftKings fantasy points per game at the low of just 24.9. I think he's clearly the safest, the best raw value of the 7,500 and above running backs this week. But I will say my favorite is Derrick Henry, especially at ownership. It just looks like a spot where, I don't know, we in other previous seasons, we typically would have seen Derrick Henry at like 29%. And so the matchups with Henry are egregious. Like I've always talked about how in wins, he averages X fantasy points per game, like the most ever. In losses, he's like a high-end RB3. And he's also very matchup sensitive. Like you saw that like all of his best games throughout his career came against Jacksonville and Houston in those divisional games. And like those, they sucked, right? Like back when they had the worst run defense in football. And so this is a game Baltimore is favored by 16, like guaranteed to win. It's also a top 3 schedule adjusted matchup. It just seems like the perfect spot for Henry to go nuclear. Honestly, the only concern would be like this game's over after 1 quarter, where like maybe Baltimore's offense doesn't even need to do anything. And like it's just a Tommy DeVito pick 6 and it's over from there. But no, he's my favorite GPP running back play. It's just incredible upside. And then Saquon Barkley, dude should never be this low owned when he's shown us like one of the most incredible ceilings of any running back in I don't know, DFS history. Eagles are also favored. They're favored by 6 points, averages 27 DraftKings fantasy points per game and victories this season, which is another insane figure. So by the way, really like all these running backs are great, but yeah, the upside case for him is he has had 5 games with 36 or more DraftKings fantasy points. I think that's 2 more than all other running backs combined this year. So just a unique, unrivaled upside. So all these guys are really interesting.
Not worried about the matchup for Saquon. Bottom 6 in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs over the past 5 weeks.
Yeah, I mean that's not great. That's again why Henry is my clear lean, but it's also one of those things with Saquon where it's just like it just takes 1 carry, you know.
Yeah, does it every game. Did you mention Kamara yet? As long as we're talking about the expensive guys.
No, hasn't scored a touchdown in 8 games, and Jake Hayner's at cornerback.
What if he has 9 catches though? Just like that, that's the floor. 9 catches for 30 yards.
Yeah, but I mean, we're talking about what if Derrick Henry has 220 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns? Fair. Look at his rushing touchdown prop this week. So I just don't think it compares.
Okay. You skipped over Brian Robinson. Any interest? No Austin Eckler, 6,200. He's kind of same price range as the chalk. Do you have any interest in making a pivot to Robinson?
Yeah, I think he's a great pivot. His 2 highest scoring games of the year have come in his only 2 games without Eckler, when he scored 23 and 21 DraftKings fantasy points. Did see a big uptick in usage in these games. He's getting pulled in the 4th quarter of blowout victories, which, you know, could be an argument against his upside. But again, he's still scored 23 and 21 in those games, despite barely playing in the 4th quarter. And then with the 4th quarter removed, he had over 75% of the backfield XFP. So like more or less a bell cow. Commanders are favored by 7.5 points. He's been very game script sensitive, but again, there is that sort of blowout risk. It's a top 3 matchup on paper. I think he's a great play.
moving down the list, I mean, maybe I just open up to you at this point. We've gone over kind of all of the chalk. Do you have any names that you specifically want to call out as players you like here?
Yeah, Devon Achane every single week, no matter what. Really rooting for Raheem Mostert to be out. I think if Raheem Mostert would be out, he would jump to, I don't know, top 5 in our projections, point per dollar projections. But still, like, not game script sensitive at all. Could smash no matter what when he gets, wide receiver 3 levels of target volume. Hasn't broken off any big runs, but he had a shit ton of those last year. And in games with Tua, he's averaging 23.2 DraftKings fantasy points per game, which would rank top 3 on the slate. Would be best XFP per game on the slate. So even with Mostert back, still a very good value.
Mostert is back. I think he's off the injury report is the latest. Just
yeah.
You have that update there. Yeah.
Yep.
Just tough start. HN has just been awesome in games with Tua, even though like the rushing efficiency way down compared to last year, but then he's so involved in the passing game.
I think he's hurt. I think just saw it. Evan Ingram had a torn labrum, and he's probably had that for 8 weeks. And there's so many players like that where it just doesn't make sense what we're seeing. And they're probably playing through an injury. That's kind of my suspicion with Achane and a few other players. I have 1 or 2 final running backs I am in love with at ownership, but I'll just give you 2 more thinner options. Tyrone Tracy, like, maybe I should have just crossed him off my list because the Giants have a 14-point implied point total, which is so pathetic. It's also like the Ravens are the number 1 pass funnel. But the dude was a former wide receiver in college who was actually pretty good. And he just saw 16 carries and 10 targets. So you were talking about, well, what if Kamara has 10 targets? It's like, all right, what if Tyrone Tracy has 10 targets and 16 carries? I'm probably not going to play him, but I think at 3%, 5,700, he deserves mention. I think Ramondre Stevenson deserves mention as stacked with Patriots defense as clear leverage off of Kyler and Connor. I don't really love it, but it's worth the mention. Isaiah Pacheco hasn't looked great since returning from injury, and the snap share is not there. But he did see 67% of the backfield XFP last week. We know Kareem Hunt is pretty terrible, or at least woefully inefficient. And so it's maybe that number climbs. Maybe he's back to being pre-injury Pacheco, and which was an elite workload on a team that typically is always leading, and it gets a ton of red zone drives, perhaps most especially against Jameis Winston, and can be stacked easily with Kansas City's defense against a quarterback who tends to throw pick sixes. Worth a mention, ultimately not high on my list. I have 1 or 2 sub 5% owned running backs I am in love with. Do you want to guess who it is?
Well, I know you already said that you like the Lions running backs.
Oh,
so I'm going to go with David Montgomery as one of them. Or I guess Jahmyr Gibbs also sub 5%.
There you go.
So Gibbs would be the top one there, would be my guess.
Yeah, it's weird. No one wants to play Detroit running backs in a game that offers the highest over-under of the season by a landslide. And Detroit is actually favored in this game by 2.5 points. Gibbs is the RB5 on the slate by DraftKings fantasy points per game. Montgomery is the RB7. This is the most RB-centric offense in football by a landslide if you look at it by XFP market share. And the thing I think everyone is missing is this is sneakily, I don't know if that's a word, but I always say it, sneaky, amazing matchup. Perhaps even a best possible matchup. And I know you're not going to think that intuitively. And that's because running backs typically get scripted out of their games against Buffalo. But I don't know that happens to Detroit, who again is favored in this game. Buffalo has given up 28.4 rushing fantasy points per game in their 3 losses, top 3 numbers. They're a top 5 run funnel by pass rate over expectation. They're bottom 6 in yards before contact per attempt allowed, which means they're not good at the run. In fact, they invite the run, and that's inherent to the Sean McDermott defense by design. Not only in that, but the invite teams to target running backs in the passing game. They're giving up the highest target share by a landslide to running backs. They're giving up the third most schedule adjusted receiving fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. And so all this amazing spot, but people, I think, are going to miss that because you just look at raw fantasy points per game allowed. But duh, Buffalo is burying teams and they have to abandon the run. Detroit, no matter what, never abandons the run. And so it's like, what is your clear preference here? I think you could play either one. This isn't like the David Montgomery of last year where he was just so touchdown or bust. He's actually getting work in the passing game. He actually is beating out Gibbs by XFP market share. It's just, you have to give the lean to Gibbs, who is just so dramatically more efficient and possesses that massive big play upside that you might need for this game to really pop, and for one of these running backs to hit a spike week. So really like those running backs, especially at this ownership, which is like stupid. I get why, because it's like so tough to pick between them, and they never project well, but I think they're elite plays this week.
So were those the two, Montgomery and Gibbs?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well then, so I have a couple like situations that I want to ask you about. Actually, three that I'm thinking off the top of my head. So the three that I'll start with the two that are more obvious that people are definitely, I would think, going to have questions about. Tony Pollard is questionable, but I think looks like he's probably going to play. Maybe he's even ruled in at this point. 6,700 against Cincinnati's defense seems like a pretty good spot for Tony Pollard. Any interest there? And then if he's still questionable, I mean, if he were ruled out, I would assume then Tyjae Spears becomes just a smash. But it looks like Pollard likely to play, right?
Yeah, I'll leave that to myself on Sunday if he's out, but I assumed he was playing. And I don't know. I don't feel great about him just because it was more of a committee last week, and now he's banged up with a different injury.
Yeah.
I also think Cincinnati probably buries them and they get scripted out, but you never know. He's just kind of someone I've kind of neglected for most of the year.
Okay.
Hasn't really killed me too much.
We talked about the Jets passing game, but Breece Hall is apparently now looks like he's going to play. If Breece Hall plays, do you think he's limited? Like 6,400, the price is really nice. The matchup is awesome for Breece Hall. I'm sort of interested, but maybe it's just too banged up and we can't consider it. Do you have any interest in Breece if he goes? And if Breece is out, then do you go to either of Braylon Allen or Isaiah Davis, or is it just like it's a committee, we can just avoid it? What do you think?
So I didn't write this one up. I think you could just say, oh, I'm not playing him, he's hurt. And I think that's totally fine. I will say, to your credit, there's more nuance there to me. I talked about how I think Achane is hurt, by the way. I think Breece Hall has been like quietly hurt all year as well. He just, like you saw last year, he had that top gear where he could do the Saquon Barkley thing and just like house his 70-yard rushing. You haven't seen that at all this year, although the Jets offensive line is similarly bad. But yeah, to your point, so it's a mistake a lot of fantasy people make is the assumption of rational coaching. That's not the right question to ask. It's the Charlie Munger thing. Show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. And it's like, I think the Jets are going to be stupid and stubborn and try to get this guy to play because, Ulbricht is coaching for his job. He's not going to be with the Jets next year. Rodgers has been hurt probably the whole season. He's refused x-rays. I think he's, trying to play his ass off to get a contract somewhere else next year. And so I think they're going to kind of push Breece to play. And like, it would make sense to not give him a lot of work. They have nothing to play for. Like, let's get a look at these young guys. But again, it's the incentive thing. And what did we see before Breece Hall sat out the previous week? Is he was barely healthy enough to play, and he still had a 65% snap share. And so when you're talking about this top three matchup, with like what could be like a minimum 65% snap share. I think he's interesting. Like ultimately, I'm not going to play him, so like maybe I shouldn't just went on this overly long self-indulgent monologue. I just think that everything just discussed was interesting to me. And again, it is like an elite matchup, and Breece Hall's volume is sick. He can get it done as a runner, as a pass catcher. But if you want to just say, yeah, I don't play injured guys, I think that's fine.
Okay. If anybody wants to get like the people have been saying like Scott always seems really like upset by the end of the show, like he doesn't want to be here. If you want to see that in like a 10-second clip, it was Scott rubbing his eyes immediately after asked about the Jets running back situation, just like, oh my god, I don't want to talk about this. I thought that was the perfect encapsulation of people thinking that you seem pissed off by the end of the show. But we're going to get through a couple more running backs before you take your break, Scott. The ones that I want to talk about that I don't think a ton of people are going to have questions about, but I'm sort of intrigued by it, is these Chargers guys, Gus Edwards or Kamani Vidal. Kamani Vidal in particular is like sort of interesting to me because he led the team in snap share last week. Is that too off the wall? Do we have too many good running backs to play Kamani Vidal this week?
So I think so. I know it makes sense as clear leverage. I think Vidal was more a function of game script where they kind of favor him as the pass catcher. But otherwise, Gus Edwards is still the goal line back. And, if they have a lead, but you never know, just because Gus Edwards like sucks so bad, they might just be down to move off of him. But still, you're talking about a guy who had 8 carries, 1 target last week. There are other spots I want to go that excite me more.
Okay. Any other running backs you want to talk about?
I can't play James Cook, but it's just the dude just seems to randomly explode for these monster weeks that I can't predict. And like I said, the over under of this game is massive. 1% is probably wrong. The last time we saw him, it was like a really gross 3-way committee, which is actually a 4-way committee when Josh Allen is vulturing all the valuable goal line work. I'm not going to play him, but like 1%, he sticks out.
All right, let's move on. So we're going to talk about wide receivers, but first, Scott, let's take your intermission. I'll play with some lineups. Maybe, I don't know what I'll do. I'll just have some fun without you.
All right, give me 3 minutes. I got to pee, so it might be a long one.
All right, sounds good. All right, while Scott is away, I think I'm just going to play with some lineups here. I think that's the way I'll play this one, because that is my favorite thing to do. I should remind you to check out Fantasy Points, all of the stuff. Use promo code OTB25 for 25% off any product at Fantasy Points. I think that's still going. It's still on the screen. I know the promo codes may or may not have gone away, so I'm not sure if that one is still active, but you can try it when you sign up for anything at Fantasy Points. Use promo code OTB25. Let's play around with some lineups though. Let me see if I can find a good lineup here while Scott is away. Man, I don't know what we both want to do Jameis lineup, so I feel like I should wait for Scott to do that one. Could do Baker. Burrow, we probably also both want to do. I'm going to do a Jaden Daniels stack. I think that's one that I'm like pretty intrigued by. It's like any given week, I feel like Jaden Daniels and Terry McLaurin can just be the skinny stack you need. So let's try that one. And Scott's also not that into Alvin Kamara, so let me throw Kamara in as the bring back there. All right, now we have 4,600 left per player. Debating whether I want to do a double stack with Ertz. Ertz looks like a pretty strong tight end value this week. Maybe I'll get back to that. First, I'll throw in a defense here. I think the Jets defense looks pretty good against the Jaguars. Anytime you can play, they haven't been great recently, the Jets defense, but playing against Mac Jones helps a bit. So let's try that. I think I am going to throw in double stack with Ertz here. Still only have 51.50 left per player. We've got some nice, relatively cheap running backs. Probably don't need to go all the way down to Vidal for this one. Can probably just go to Rico Dowdle. Probably not going to include Brian Robinson in the stack here. Could go to Hubbard. Let's do a Dowdle. A 48-33 with 2 wide receivers and a flex left. So I'm going to find a cheap wide receiver to throw in here. Not the best slate for cheap wide receivers. Could throw in a McMillan, Shepard. Yeah, I don't think there's any like standout cheap wide receivers. So I'm going to try Jalen McMillan. Now we have 5,400. Have a little bit more to pay up for. Elijah Moore. We'll get to talking about that one. And then 5,800. Now see, Brian Thomas still does. Oh, Brian Thomas. Sorry, not Brian Robinson. Get those names mixed up all the time. Man, could fit Kelsey in there as a mini stack with Elijah Moore. If I want to go double tight end. So don't think I'm going to do Brian Thomas because it's against my defense. So yeah, I'll throw Kelsey into this one. All right. There we have it. There is a Millie Maker lineup. Jaden Daniels with Terry McLaurin. Alvin Kamara bring back Rico Dowdle. Solo, Jalen McMillan, one off, Elijah Moore, and Travis Kelsey. Oh, I forgot. Jaden Daniels also with Zach Ertz. We have a double stack there with the bring back of Kamara. Elijah Moore and Travis Kelsey, secondary stack, and then just Jets defense. There you have it. A Millie Maker winning lineup. Not sharing with Scott when that one wins it. All right. I'm not going to do another one here. Is Scott back? I feel like I hear him. No, he's not back. Okay. I'll check in on you guys. Not says can tell Scott isn't a gamer. Yeah, I mean, come on. Where's the bladder? You gotta work on the bladder. Make sure that you can go a little bit longer. No empty Mountain Dew bottles on hand. Yeah. Pepper Tony says Diami Brown time. I could have gone Tyrone Tracy as John suggested. I kind of thought about playing Tyrone Tracy. Yeah, that would have worked too instead of Kelsey. Ascot in the altitude. Rusty says 30. He might have 100% 3,700 McMillan. It's a stand there. All right. Scott is back. Scott, I made a lineup without you.
Oh.
Yeah. It was a Jane Daniels double stack with Terry McLaurin and Zach Ertz. I did include Alvin Kamara as the bring back. I had 5,800 left over at flex. I went with Travis Kelsey over Tyrone Tracy or Brian Thomas, all these other options. We'll have to talk about. We haven't gotten to wide receiver yet. I included Jalen McMillan. I don't think I wrote up in my write-up of the main slate. I don't think I wrote up a single wide receiver under like $4,000. Like I don't think I found any cheap wide receivers. Certainly under like I know I like some $5,000 wide receivers. No real cheap ones. So maybe you can point some out to me. Sell me on some cheap wide receivers. But are you ready to continue and talk about some wide receivers here?
Let's do it.
All right. Brian Thomas Jr. could have fit there as the chalk. I also went with Jets defense, which is why I did not include Brian Thomas Jr. in my lineup. How do we feel about Brian Thomas at 18% ownership?
I mean, like I see it. He's not our top point per dollar value, but when I was looking at the slate on Monday or Tuesday, I kind of saw him being deserving of that. I will just say, like, if you want to fade him for tournaments, like that's easy. It's just Mac Jones sucks. Mac Jones sucks so bad. BTJ's bread and butter is the deep ball. Mac Jones has 0 deep completions. Balls thrown 20 plus yards in the air. 44 quarterbacks have a deep completion. Mac Jones is not one of them. Argument for him is, dude, I just love the guy. Like if you're in a dynasty league, do everything you can to buy him. He was averaging 2.81 yards per route run through the first 8 weeks of the season. That ranked behind only Nico Collins and Justin Jefferson. One of the most predictive metrics we have is rookie season yards per route run. This was the best in fantasy points data history. He did all that while Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, and Gabe Davis were healthy. Now they're all hurt. And volume is already trending up in a massive way. Week 13, he had 215 air yards, had a 47% first read target share. That was all like basically double his prior career high. And he's been like modestly productive despite, 0 deep completions, really good volume, schematic matchups favorable. But again, it's Mac Jones. This defense, I think you can kind of waffle back and forth on like how tough this is. But I mean, Sauce Gardner's back, and on paper, it's a really good defense.
Yep. I like this.
So I don't know. You tell me what to do, Neil. After synthesizing everything I just said,
I think it's a cash game. Like, I don't know if he's a lock.
I mean, he doesn't even profile as a cash. Like there's so much
projects really
to
well.
his profile. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm probably not going to get to the field on Brian Thomas just because it is kind of a tough matchup, and he has Mac Jones throwing him the ball. I probably come in a little bit underweight. 18%, like you said, is not like he's super chalky. Like he's about appropriately owned. I suspect that I'll lean in more elsewhere and be under the field here. But yeah, that doesn't seem all that far off from where it should be. Matt says, FYI, on a film set, when you have to pee, you call it a 10-1. Sounds better than saying I have to pee. We are all about being open and honest on this show. So we just call it like it is. I say I'm doing nasally stuff. Scott says I have to pee. We're not playing any games with our language on this show. But that's a good note. Thank you for that. Good to know. Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, both Bengals receivers. I mean, if you think you're going to be getting at all away from the field by playing Burrow double stacks, not looking that way. Chase 8,400, Higgins 6,800. So big price difference. Do you have a preference between the two of them? Do you just play both of them? How do you feel about the Bengals receivers?
Yeah, I think they're elite values, which is why I really like Joe Burrow and why there's a case to be made for Will Levis. Jamar Chase, I'll say, so he's 8,400, and you could say he deserves to be 10,000 plus, pretty easily. He's averaging the third most fantasy points per game of any wide receiver over the past decade, 6.3 more than the next closest wide receiver, who isn't even on this slate. That's the largest gap between a wide receiver 1 and a wide receiver 2 over the past decade. He has 3 of the 4 highest scoring games this season, all 3 of the highest scoring games since he entered the league. He's been at his best most recently, 38 DraftKings fantasy points per game over his last 4. Joe Burrow balling the F out. And so what you're left with is this ownership percentage. Is that fair? Is that not? You could say he's more volatile. He's pretty volatile. Averages just 13.1 DraftKings fantasy points per game in his bottom 50% of games, although most of those are without Higgins. You can say this is kind of a tough matchup on paper. Titan sellout to stop the deep ball too. You could say Tennessee probably doesn't push Cincinnati here, but still, it's just he's a value. Massive bury you upside, and he's just been unstoppable these last few weeks. With T. Higgins, doesn't have Jamar Chase upside, but clearly one of the best values in the slate. Over his last 7 games, ranked 7th in first read target share, 6th in XFP per game, 5th in DraftKings fantasy points per game. And what is he? Price is the wide receiver 16. So clear as day, beautiful value. So I don't know. You're the game theory genius. Why don't you tell me what to do based on that?
Well, so T. Higgins very clearly is, I think, a cash game lock. I think I wrote him up as a cash game lock. Just an awesome projection for a guy who's somehow only 6,800. I think you probably want to be overweight on both Chase and Higgins, just because, like you said, Chase is just too cheap for the upside he has shown over and over. He's going after the Triple Crown this year. They're going to want to get him involved as much as possible.
Oh, that's a good point. Have you said anything about caring about that?
I don't know that they have, other than the, like, if you go back to like the offseason, the contracts, it was like, I want to be paid $1 more than Justin Jefferson, right? Wasn't that like the narrative this out? Like, there's clearly some competition going on between Chase and Jefferson. I'm sure it's friendly, but like, yeah, they're competitive. So I kind of assume as a diva wide receiver that he wants to get the triple crown. But I don't know how much Joe Burrow cares about that. I think they really care about winning. Pepperoni says Chase said that was his goal this year recently. So yeah, I guess he did say that.
I love it.
Good note. So then you have to ask yourself, like, well, does that cut into T Higgins then? Like they clearly, like, there's positive correlation with the quarterbacks, but like there's going to be negative correlation with the two of them. I actually haven't looked at that. Maybe you have the.
I can pull it up if you want to give me 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'd be
Power
curious
the
to hear
data
if they
suite.
have. Yeah, if they've hit together like in the same week at all this year, or like
yeah, they for sure.
What one year
And
is a small
throughout their
sample
career.
size. Okay, that's right. It actually won a Slate at least once this year. So they can. But ultimately, I think I want to be overweight to both of the Bengals receivers. Excuse me, sorry. I think that you can play them together as you just noted. Yeah, no, I think they both look great. The downside of me doing too much talking, Scott, is that even with a cough drop in my throat, I am losing my voice a little bit as I'm trying to do this.
Poor Neil.
Steven says, Scott and Neil, can you share any relevant Coach Speak stuff? If I had it up, I would. We could. Both of us just subscribe to the Coach Speak Index Discord. Highly recommend checking that out if you haven't already done so. I have not looked at the Coach Speak for the Bengals recently. But yeah, no, I think 17% Chase, 16% Higgins. Certainly want to be overweight on Higgins.
Yeah, so slight negative correlation. There was that week 11 game where Chase had 26.5, T Higgins had 33. But outside of that, no, it does look like they're kind of capping each other's upside.
All right, so just one. At the very least, though, I think individually, I probably want to be overweight on both of them. Certainly on Higgins, like that's just not enough ownership. Despite the dud last week, he's been just awesome this year. All right, I'm going to let you start doing more of the talking again.
Yeah, that's fair.
Let's move. Do you want to keep going down the list? Ladd McConkey, Cortland Sutton, Judy.
Yeah, Ladd McConkey. Obviously, there's some concerns with this knee and shoulder injury. He missed a game against the Chiefs. That's a really big game for the Chargers. To be fair, it did seem to come down to the wire. He also dealt with a number of injuries that seemed to like keep him out way longer than he otherwise should have. That was a big issue in college and a reason why he might have fell in the draft. But the dude can flat out ball. I freaking love him. I think he's amazing. I think he's super talented. You look at first downs per route run, yards per route run, everything. This looks like an elite talent. And so every week in the everything report was like, I'm just waiting for him to get alpha wide receiver 1 levels of target share. Like he deserves this. Like everyone else in the team is not good. He profiles as elite. When is this coming? It came in his last game. He had a 50% target share. That was one of the top 5 highest of any player in any game this season. He had 100 yards by halftime. And now he gets a top 10 matchup, a perfect schematic matchup. He's destroying zone coverage, which he's going to see a lot of against Tampa Bay. Yeah, it looks like a spot where the Chargers could get pushed. That matters. They only had 32 passing yards in their last victory. And so really it just comes down to injury and like, how healthy do we think he's going to be? So I want to monitor like the Jay Glazers of the world, the Ian Rappaports of the world, what they're saying on Sunday, if it's like full go, no limitations. Cause like if there wasn't this injury, like he might be an all-in play for me, but with that added in, it's a little murkier. I want to hear something like no limitations. He's good to go. But otherwise, yeah, profiles as a great play. Cortland Sutton might be my favorite. I don't know. He's at least up there. To me, he's kind of like in the Michael Thomas role and like no one's talking about it. You might remember, Neil, that Michael Thomas holds the record for most receptions in a single season. So that's a valuable role. But he's hit 19 DraftKings fantasy points in 5 of his last 6 games, 70 plus receiving yards, 8 plus targets in all 6. Over that span, top 5 in XFP per game, top 5 in fantasy points per game. Dude was like always just like a highlight reel contested catch artist. Leads all wide receivers in ass over his last 4 games. He looks awesome. Bo Nix looks like the real deal. It's a great schematic matchup. It's probably a neutral matchup on paper against the Colts. I think he's a great play. I really like him. I think he's getting a little, I guess these guys are all tight in that 15 to 18%. So maybe not. You go down the list to 5 and I think he was my number 2. My number 1 though would be Jerry Jeudy. And I know I'm over explaining these things, but I'm also giving Neil a chance to rest his voice. Jake and I get into it, and I think Jake is 100% right here. I have sort of turned my back on XFP this year. It's weird where it's like maybe Saquon has just like fully broken me. But I've been sort of arguing against XFP where it's like I wrote up the Trey McBride blurb and I was just like, if he scores a touchdown, he's the best tight end play we've seen in weeks, right? If he doesn't score a touchdown, he's not a good play. And like, maybe you just don't play guys who don't score touchdowns. And Jake's counter to that was like, bro, why did you invent XTD if you're not going to use it? Trey McBride ranks 4th in expected touchdowns per game. He's due. This is fluky. And I'm like, all right, you know what? You're totally right. And it's like counter to the NWIs of the world and the MVS of the world and the Taysums of the world. And so maybe they just broke my brain. Jake is arguing against Jerry Jeudy a little bit. He is, this is totally accurate, by the way. If you look at Jameis Winston starts, this offense is so incredibly spread out where like Jeudy is not at all the alpha number 1 by XFP per game. And Njoku leads 15.4. Then it's Jeudy 15.2. Then it's Elijah 14.7. Then it's Tillman 13.2 or 16.0 in full games. So like Jeudy is not the clear alpha. But to me, he's the best wide receiver play of the slate because the production is clearly there. He ranks behind only Jamar Chase in fantasy points per game since Jameis Winston took over. That's despite being out targeted by David Njoku 28-19 over the last 2 weeks. And now Njoku's questionable. Cedric Tillman's still out. And so I think this could be a spot where Jeudy finally gets this alpha number 1 target volume. So I'm curious, can you pull up our projections and see where he ranks by point per dollar value? Yeah, number 1. He's number 1 to me. I feel pretty good about it. But the thing is, Elijah Moore is also up there. He's 14th. Jake loves Elijah. I feel really good about it. You know, like it's hard to talk me off of Elijah Moore, who's been one of my guys since before he got drafted. And I really think you can do that. You can play both even on like a non-Winston lineup, just because, like I said, 365 passing yards per game against non-Steelers opponents. All those XFP numbers I cited were like well above what their salary would suggest. And now you potentially remove David Njoku, you remove Cedric Tillman. So tremendous upside. I feel good about it. Yeah, you're seeing that Elijah Moore slot funnel against the Chiefs. That's a crucial point.
Yeah, that was a point that Jake made on Cage Match. I do remember this one thing because I drafted Jerry Jeudy, and then Jake said, I think this is more of a slot funnel matchup, so I'm going to take Elijah Moore. So he ended up going for Elijah Moore. Elijah Moore is only $5,000 to Jerry Jeudy's $6,200. Already pulled up some of the data that we were looking at in terms of.
Another great stat by Jake, who, by the way, co-authors the Slate Breakdown with me. If Njoku were to sit out, Elijah would be the clear primary beneficiary. He gets all the rest of the work, within 10 yards at the line of scrimmage that Njoku was getting. And you saw that. It was weird with Deshaun Watson. He averaged like 16 air yards per game. With Winston, he's over 100 and he ranks like top 10. And so like he could always just go back into that role while still getting some of the intermediate and deep targets. Yeah, ultimately, I think they're both great plays. And again, this is why I love Jameis. We talked to the Bengals wide receivers. It's why I love Joe Burrow so much, and I feel really good about them.
So we're going to get to tight ends. We can talk about any tight ends we want to talk about on the Browns later. But Steven asked, what about Mike Woods? And I had not realized 9.6 expected fantasy points per game in his 2 games with Jameis. Maybe he's a sneaky, interesting, cheap wide receiver. I think he's only like 3,200. Have you given any thought to Mike Woods?
Not really.
While we're talking about Browns,
he had 1 catch last week, 3 targets. I don't know. I just kind of trust the guys whose names I recognize more, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I feel the same way, but then it's like, if we see Njoku out on top of Tillman, then it's like, well, apparently he's at least been out there. I don't know, because we're so lacking for value at wide receiver.
Yeah. Let me check the route share report. That's a good one. If it's over 60%, I'll tip my hat. Hey, you know what? I've been owned, Neil. I've been owned.
You've been owned.
77%, 78%. All right.
Yeah, pretty interesting. The past 2 weeks, really, really strong rep participation for Mike Woods. Maybe that's the value receiver we need to be thinking about a little bit.
Maybe full disgusting onslaught Jameis stack with Saquon, Mixon, and Henry.
Yeah, just throw in all the studs. I don't hate that.
This guy runs a sub 4.4 40, so there's some big play potential.
All right.
That maybe Elijah doesn't have. I don't know.
Steven says, I'm good for something. I'll also note that Steven was saying earlier that people should hit the like button, and I have not done my job of reminding people, please do like the video if you have not already done so, if you're appreciative of the work that we are putting in here. Of course,
how many viewers do we have?
200 something.
200 something, and we only have like 5. Like, do you guys not like us?
Did you hate us?
Am I doing something wrong?
Why do you hate us?
Why do you hate us?
Subscribe to the Fantasy Points channel if you have not.
Do we need to do more ASMR?
Clearly, it's they want my nasally stuff. I'm like cutting out too much of the nasally stuff, so people are not liking the video. That's probably what it is. All right, let's keep talking about some football players. So we like the Browns guys. You like Jerry Jeudy. I like Jared. Like we both like Jerry Jeudy and Elijah Moore, and apparently Mike Woods now too. So I think we're in on the Browns guys. I
mean, there's a chance that this game just does nothing because Jameis can do that. It's just the upside it's been best of like any offense by catchable air yards, like 40% better than any other offense, or them and the Bengals, and then 60% better than anyone else. And so you just want to lean into that for tournaments. So if it flops, don't get mad at me. I don't care. Still a good play, good process.
Yeah. Matt says Neil soldiering through reminiscent to the Jordan flu game. Yeah, I said this because you said the same comment when I was doing my Thursday night video that it was my or I forget one of them that it was my Jordan flu game, and I said, well, I need you to come in and be my Scottie Pippen, but that's that's not really our roles here. I'm usually the Scottie Pippen on this show, setting up Scott. So but for that narrative, I guess I
you want to hear a hot basketball take?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Scottie Pippen was better than Michael Jordan.
Oh, you're just here's
why I say that, because it's a fun thing to say. I just like Scottie Pippen. I think he's cool, and I like want to believe it. And I don't know anything about basketball, and I don't care if people get mad at me. So that's my take. I have a Scottie Pippen jersey, and then the rest are all Celtics jerseys.
Scott, you flustered me. I couldn't even come up with what I was trying to say here. But here's the thing. I spent my entire childhood making that argument. I was the biggest Scottie Pippen fan in the 90s. I was like every other like child of the 90s. I was like, I'm a Bulls fan just because they were on TV and like that's who everybody like. It's cool to be a Bulls fan, but I was counterculture in that I was like, but I'm a Scottie Pippen fan. I was like the biggest Scottie Pippen stan. I became like huge Bulls fan when Michael Jordan was out for those couple years. That's when I really became a Bulls fan. So I argued so many times that he was better than Michael Jordan. I don't think it's true. As an adult, I think that's just
right,
wrong.
right. But it's
clearly, but yeah,
Jordan never did anything without him, and then
true.
Pippen went deep into the playoffs without Jordan.
Yeah, that is true. They bad call. The Scottie Pippen foul on a 3-pointer to lose in the Eastern Conference Finals. Yeah, no, I 100%. All right, continue on. There was some other comment that I was going to hit on, but we should continue moving on. Oh, John Byrne, I like this one. It says actual fantasy points being better than expected fantasy points is a sneaky boomer take. Yeah, Scott is also the boomer on this show. He's Scottie Pippen and he's the boomer on the show.
It is the boomer. I'm worried some of these guys just broke my brain this year. Mateo said Neil is such a hipster.
Yeah.
Which hey, this is the outside the box show, right? So like I feel like that's
right.
That's perfect.
You got to
also peace to Mateo. Now we smoke weed like Tony Montana sniffed the yayo.
I don't even know the lyric, who that's from.
Notorious B.I.G.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah.
Could have known that one. Okay. Nico Collins. We talked about CJ Stroud. You're not into CJ Stroud. Are you doing any Nico Collins?
Yeah, Nico Collins is a really good play. It's kind of tough to stack him up against Jamar Chase because Chase just seems like the much better play, but I can see that hitting. I really like Nico. We talked about CJ Stroud's home road splits. Since the start of last season, Collins averages 60% more or 55% more fantasy points per route run at home. He's also been awesome. Like I was saying this in like week 3, and I was like, I know I should get stoned to death for saying it, but Nico Collins looks to me like Julio Jones reincarnated, and like he's backing it up. In his full games this year, he's averaging 117 yards per game, 21.8 fantasy points per game. Those numbers would rank first and second best among all wide receivers. It's more yards per game than Jamar Chase. And the only wide receivers to ever have more yards per game in a single season are Julio Jones, Calvin Johnson, and Josh Gordon. So like, yeah, elite territory. They're also leaning a lot more pass heavy by PROE in the last 3 games since Nico returned. So I think that's like an important point when looking at bringbacks and going Mixon versus Collins, but ultimately they're both really good plays. Yeah, I think he's only Terry McLaurin has more 100-yard games than Collins this season, which is crazy because he missed 5 games and was under a 50% snap share in the 2 others. Dude is just awesome. Dude is just really good. Matchup, you can kind of go back and forth on whether it's good or not, but he's just awesome.
I think you talked a little bit about Calvin Ridley earlier. What is your level of interest in $5,900 Calvin Ridley at 12% ownership?
Yeah, there's just tremendous upside here. He ranked top 5 in XFP last week, but didn't really produce. And that's just the story of this season. He leads all players in air yards, but he also leads in uncatchable air yards. So he actually only ranks like 10th in catchable air yards. You look at his usage and volume, it's been elite since Hopkins was traded. Hasn't really had much to show for it. He's gone over 15 DraftKings fantasy points just twice. It's 1 fewer than Nick Westbrook-Akina. He had a top 3 matchup last week, didn't do anything, but he gets another top 3 matchup this week. I don't know. It seems like a profile that's good for GPPs. Very boomer bust. I will say, yeah, I don't know. I wish Will Levis never suffered that shoulder injury because, you know, the tape on him after that was really, really rough and he couldn't do anything against Jacksonville, who stinks. But it's an elite matchup. They're going to have to throw it. They're going to have to air it out. I really like Calvin Ridley, but I honestly think NWI is also in play. I know XFP, like he's a wide receiver 60 by XFP, but for whatever reason, it's working. And you get a little bit of leverage there. I kind of think you have to play these guys if you're going to play Burrow, just because otherwise you just play Chase Brown because they don't get pushed.
Right. So you have to play one of
and
Ridley's or NWI.
Ridley is for sure the better play, but like you need to think about NWI.
We talked about Elijah Moore, Marvin Harrison Jr. Fantasy was projected for 11% ownership. He's down to 5,500. Like the price tag has come down so much on Marvin Harrison Jr. We got to at least think about it. How much interest do you have?
Not much. I didn't write him up. He's been a colossal bust relative to expectations. I don't know that he's been a colossal bust relative to a 5,500 price tag. He does have 2 spike weeks. Like I think he has 2 games with 27 plus DraftKings fantasy points. It's like same as Justin Jefferson. It's a good schematic matchup, which like matters for him. That's mattered quite a bit for him. But it's not like amazing. It doesn't ultimately really stand out. Christian Gonzalez coverage, I don't think that really matters too much.
I feel like nobody ever wants to play Adam Thielen except for Scott Barrett. Sometimes does want to play Adam Thielen. Looks like the field is catching on to Adam Thielen being a thing once again this year. 10% ownership. How much interest do you have?
A ton, man. It's worked out great for us these last 2 weeks. Why not go back to it? If you look at what he's done over the last 3 weeks, the stats and everything report, but it's like if you add back that 8-yard catch he had, that was a touchdown. The ref said it wasn't a touch, but like everyone and their mother is like, there's definitely a touchdown. What is it? Like back-to-back top 5 weeks by fantasy points. And like, that's with him, slowly working his way back. You see the route share climbing up to 85% last week, target share climbing up to 32%, top 7 last week. And so now he's fully back into this role. He gets a great matchup. Cowboys are weak against the slot, and now they're starting slot cornerback. Jordan Lewis is questionable. We've been on this for a while, and it's, what did he do last year is like through the first 10 weeks, he was a top 10 wide receiver by fantasy points per game. And, then the wheels started to fall off because he's like 47 years old, but he's not too much wear and tear on the tires this year, like, cause he missed all that time, I guess. He looks good on tape. 5,400. I think that's a steal.
Yeah. Seems like a pretty strong play here. I'm with you. So, this will be the week that he does. Cause I'm with you on playing Adam Thielen this week. So apologies there, for mushing Thielen. Amon-Ra St. Brown, I skipped over. He's 7,600. We talked about liking that game environment. Like it has a high total, 2 teams that can keep it competitive. How much interest in $7,600 Amon-Ra St. Brown?
Yeah, Jake really got me on this. It's a great spot for him. I know he's like so hard to trust. You look at that, like the massive drop off in yards per game from last year to this year. But like this is the spot where Detroit would get pushed, right? The Bills are also a massive slot funnel, 6th most schedule adjusted to the slot, but they rank top 5 against outside wide receivers. It's also a great schematic based on like pressure sensitivity, and a few other spots. It like just looks like a perfect spot for an eruption game. I've kind of narrowed it down to like either it's St. Brown, and then potentially also you could have Jameis in there stacked, Jameson, or it's the running backs. And I think I kind of rather play the running backs at the lower ownership, but for sure deserves mention.
Yeah. You talked about liking Aaron Rodgers a bit. We have Garrett Wilson coming in at 9% ownership at 6,500. Devonta Adams, 8% ownership at 6,900. Do you like them as one-offs? Are you only playing them with Aaron Rodgers? How do you feel about the Jets' top guys?
Elite matchup. I will say I think you can just cover your bases with the Rodgers dub stack. It's a little too tricky for me to pick between the two of them.
It's so tough. Like you just look at like the numbers since Devonta Adams has been on the team. Like every week I look at it, it's like they look about identical. Like I don't know how to break a tie there.
Yeah, Adams much better volume, but like Wilson's better, I think. So
right. Malik Neighbors. Somebody asked about Malik Neighbors. Do you have any interest there against Baltimore? Pass funnel, even with Tommy DeVito, he's down to 6,400. Any interest?
Yeah, I wrote him up. I liked him, but that was back when he was showing 3%. And like Jake and I kind of argued back and forth in it. And then when ownership got updated to 9%, I just kind of took him out. Usage is obscenely good. The dude is insanely talented. I like that he's like a bit of a dick where he's just like constantly complaining about not getting the ball, even when he already has 12 targets. Like, you love to see that. Great matchup pass funnel. But I mean, 14-point implied point total. They've had a passing touchdown in just like one of their last 8 games. I think 200 plus yards in only like 2 of their last 7. So it's one of those things where, like, legitimately being the wide receiver 3 on the Browns might be better than the wide receiver 1 on the Giants. It's like one of those things. Ultimately, like, I could see it, but when it came in at 9%, I just felt like there's other ways to attack.
Okay. Let's talk about the Buffalo receivers. Like, Khalil Shakir coming in at 8% ownership at 6,100. Amari Cooper coming in at 5% at 5,300. Do you have a preference? Is there anybody else among the Buffalo receivers you like? How are you, if you are playing Josh Allen, who are you playing him with?
Yeah, that's the trickiest thing about it, where it really kind of gives an advantage to the MME guys. I will say my lean is Cooper. Shakir, I love. I think he's like one of the most underrated wide receivers in all of football, but just like the role isn't really one that lends itself to much upside, like spike week upside. Cooper, meanwhile, he just had the most air yards of any player in any game this season. He also shreds man coverage, which he's going to see a ton of this week. But you look at either the route share report or the snap share report, he hasn't been over a 60% snap share all season. So he's still like kind of this limited, not quite a full-time player. And now Keon Coleman's back, and Coleman's interesting because in his last 2 healthy games, he had 7+ targets, 18+ DraftKings fantasy points in both of them. But to me, this is tricky, and maybe they're both values. I would give the lean to Cooper. I just think he has more upside when we're talking about a player who had the most air yards of any player in any game this season.
Yeah, that it's so tough because he had 14 targets last year. Like, that is totally elite, but 58.5% route participation. I don't know. It doesn't feel sustainable to get targeted 14 times on.
That's not even the
routes.
most. Yeah, that's not even the most important. It's the 249 air yards, and
Yeah.
for whatever reason, Allen's deep targets weren't as catchable as they typically be. But like, this really could have been a massive, massive game for him. Yeah, that targets per route run is crazy, but like, it's encouraging because other people are going to look at the 60% snap share and just write him off, especially with Keon back. But it's like, at least when he's on the field, he's a focal point.
Yeah. I had not realized that he had 27.8 expected fantasy points last week and 12.5 actual. Yeah, it's a little bit rough. But 16 targets, pretty damn good. Who else? Let me just open it up to you. Do you have targets that we have not already talked about at wide receiver?
Yeah, let me make sure I'm not forgetting anyone. What is Zay Flowers checking in at?
6%.
Okay, so again, this is definitely like a Derrick Henry game, or that's how it projects to be. But in his last 8 full games, he has a 26.5% target share that ranks top 10. So usage is good, although he's on a bit of a cold streak. Basically, like, you just got to talk about him when you're talking about GPPs, just because the upside's there. Very volatile player. Jamar Chase and Zay Flowers are the only wide receivers with more than 4 games of at least 21.5 DraftKings fantasy points. He's sucked in all of his other games, but he has that. So, the upside's there, and that could hit at low ownership. So always worth a shout out just based on that one stat. Goes a little under owned relative to that. I think Terry McLaurin's really interesting. And like that's kind of why I liked Jaden over Lamar and Hurts. It's because like no one's playing Terry, and it's without Noah Brown. McLaurin's another XFP breaker. Like he's breaking XFP, and it's like driving me crazy. He has fewer targets than both Noah Brown and Zach Ertz over the last 6 weeks. Hasn't mattered at all. McLaurin has exceeded 15.5 DraftKings fantasy points in 10 of 11 games. By fantasy points per game, he ranks 7th over this stretch. 29th in XFP per game, but no Noah Brown should lend itself towards more volume. And it's a really good spot for him. The Saints ranked bottom 5 against the deep pass. That's where a bunch of McLaurin's production has come from. So 3%, I like him as a one-off on that. But more so for Jaden Stacks because it's so easy.
Okay. Trying to see if there's any. We talked about Michael Woods, who I think we convinced ourselves to have a little bit of interest in. What about any of the Tampa Bay cheap guys? Like or I guess we can include Mike Evans too. Let's talk about the Tampa Bay guys in general. You talked about Baker always being in play. Do you have a preference between Mike Evans, Sterling Shepard, Jalen McMillan, anybody that you like specifically like there?
Yeah, I want to love Evans. I just think he's like badly hurt. And so I'm probably not going to play him. By the way, if he sits out, Kate Otten would be a great play. That people might not immediately think of. If it's like one of those late news things. Yeah, I wrote up Shepard. He has at least a 20% target share in 3 straight. He's getting design targets, a lot of those, with even more if Bucky Irving sits out. He's sort of got some of that role. It's a pretty good matchup for him. But it's still a guy who hasn't cracked 11 fantasy points all year. He's just like one of the only good cheap wide receivers on the slate. But if you wanted to say Michael Woods is a better play, like I wouldn't argue with you. I almost deleted my write up. Another guy, Josh Downs, just barely made my list. Michael Pittman's going to get shadowed by Patrick Surtain. Downs, I'm a massive believer in his talent. He ranks top 3 among all players in targets per route run, XFP per route run, has been productive in his last few games with Anthony Richardson. But ultimately, like all those stats I just cited were, Joe Flacco was really peppering him in a way that Richardson wasn't. I think we learned our lesson with Adonai Mitchell last week. It's just hard to trust any receiver tied to Anthony Richardson. But I guess if you're going to play one of the quarterbacks in this game, he's in play.
We were getting the question in chat. Is why I pulled that up. Who plays right wide receiver for the Bucks? And it is Jalen McMillan. I guess this is why he asked. I don't know. Just had to look that up. All right. I'm trying to think if there's any other receivers that I am super interested in that I want to hear your thoughts on. And I'm not finding anybody really standing out. I also, by the way, Terry McLaurin was in the lineup that I built while you were taking your break. So we're aligned.
Interesting, just based on that.
Yeah.
Not McLaurin, McMillan.
McMillan, yeah. Based on the matchup.
Yeah, like go back to schedule adjusted. Look how insane that is.
No, well, he was not like at the top here. This is
Raiders. Oh, sorry.
Raiders, yeah.
That's not on the main slate.
He was down here. This is like positive, but who plays right wide receiver for the Raiders? Now that we looked that up, I guess we can. That does look kind of nuts. Jacoby Myers.
Hell yeah.
Is he on the slate getting ownership?
No.
Okay. He's on like Monday Night Football or something?
Yeah, Sunday night, I think.
Okay.
Monday night. No, you were right. Monday night.
Okay. All right. Any others? Tyler Boyd. Trying to see if there's any like cheap receivers that are interesting.
No.
Okay. We're done talking receivers. We're over it. Is that what I'm hearing? All right.
Yeah.
Let's move on and talk about tight ends. Stone Smart is the Stone Chalk. 20% projected. See what I did there? 20% projected ownership. He is 2,600. How do we feel about Chalk Stone Smart?
I don't know, dude. He's fine. There was one game in his career he cleared a 40% snap share. He had 0 targets, but that was with a different regime. Last week, after Disley got hurt, he had a 73% route share, 25% target share within a small sample. So that's encouraging. Ultimately, it's just like he's one of the better like Stoneman tight ends we've gotten. And it's a week where there's a lot of studs to pay up for. So I get it. And like Strange is kind of right there. who was my favorite? I think it was Smart, barely. When Ingram was out earlier in the year, I don't know, he was averaging like 9.5 XFP per game, 9.5 fantasy points per game. We're like, even if you drop that by 20% with Mac Jones, that's still like basically tied with Stone Smart in terms of the expectation or projection. Again, it's just good, cheap tight end. That really the crux of that argument, I feel like, is that it allows you to pay up for the stars at the other positions. It's also not a great tight end slate. So it's like, what if McBride flops, right? So
True.
And then you just win by having the cheapest guy who also sucked.
Yeah. What about McBride? What's your interest level?
Yeah, so I thought this was a crazy stat. So he ranks 6th best among all receivers in target share. Top 7 in yards per route run since week 8. In leagues where touchdowns were worth 0 fantasy points, he would rank as the wide receiver 9. But here's a crazy stat. If you spotted him just 4 additional receiving yards twice, he would have season highs of 28, 25, 24, 21, 19 DraftKings fantasy points, averaging 22 DraftKings fantasy points per game in his top 50% of games. All that without a touchdown. So if you just like add a touchdown to all those games, just a few of those games, like it's clear to see like massive upside. And so, yeah, you could just say, oh, I don't play the guy who doesn't score touchdowns, but he ranks 5th among all tight ends in XTD per game. So really that just says it's like fluky. And, you know, we were talking last week about guys who were due, definitely seems due. Not a good schematic for him at all. Like if you look at the wide receiver coverage tool, it's like a really bad spot. So if he's 18%, maybe that's a reason to get away from him. But I don't know. I kind of like him as a value at 6K. I do think he's due for a touchdown. And maybe this is a spot for it.
I think it was Eric in chat says McBride is bad matchup, is going to score a touchdown this week. I have not had any success in speaking it into existence. I've tried several times to speak it into existence. I hope you have better luck than I do with that, Eric. And we finally get that McBride touchdown. I play him all the time. I think it looks good once again. Hunter Henry, 4,300 on the other side, 14% ownership. Level of interest?
Yeah, he's sort of like the discount or appropriately priced Trey McBride to me. He's clearly New England's number 1 receiver. He's had at least 8 targets in 5 of Drake May's last 6 full games. That's really good volume, really good consistency for a tight end, which is like an inherently volatile position. Averages 11.4 fantasy points per game in those games without a touchdown. That's really solid at this price. And so, yeah, like if he scored a touchdown, like he could be maybe the best tight end play of the slate by a margin. Maybe this is a good spot for it. It looks bottom 10 for everyone, bottom 10 for Henry even, but Arizona is a bit of a slot / tight end funnel. So it could be a good volume game for him. I think he's strong and he's fine.
This ownership clearly assumes that David Njoku is out, which we don't have officially yet, but I think he's like closer to doubtful, I would say, than like more doubtful than probable for Njoku. If Njoku does sit, we have Jordan Akins at 2,700. If Njoku does play, I don't even know what his price tag is. How are you playing the Browns tight end situation?
Yeah, if Njoku's out, I'm probably not too excited about Akins. I know the price is right and low ownership than Smart and Strange, but he cleared a 55% snap share in only 1 of 3 games without Njoku this year. The coach confirmed it would be a tight end by committee. It is a good matchup, but he doesn't excite me. I think you could play Njoku if he suits up as like a Millie or like super low owned guy. Just because like insane usage volume, leads the league in targets over the last 2 weeks. All that's well and good, but like obviously you're nervous about this hamstring injury. I will just say he picked up that hamstring injury in the second quarter of last week's game and he played through it. And in the second half, he just those 2 quarters, had 15 fantasy points on 7 targets, a 32% target share. So like that injury didn't really slow him down at all. And again, there's a lot of upside to Jameis pass catchers. Really seemed like Njoku was the favorite. He quote unquote hopes to play this week. And it's a top 3 matchup, but yeah, he's also, I don't know. Hamstring injuries are notoriously horrible. I can't hear you, Neil. Is this just me?
Trey, no, I did it. I did the Scott.
Wow, you shocked me. I thought my computer broke.
Nope, wow. That was me. I was just opening it up to you. I mean, I see several names that are kind of interesting: Dalton Schultz, Zach Ertz, Jake Ferguson, Sam Laporta, Travis Kelce. If you want to pay up, Johnny Smith. A lot of great options here. You talked about K-Dotton already. Who else do you like at tight end?
I have a clear favorite in Jonnu Smith. I think if I'm being honest, I like him more than Trey McBride. So you look at what he's done over his last 4 games, right? He had 31 DraftKings fantasy points, then 24, then 24, and then last week he had 13.4. He had 0 in regulation. Everything else came in overtime. And so it's very possible that weeks 11 through 13 were the aberration. Because yeah, it was weird to see Jonnu Smith, formerly Atlanta's tight end 2, being the number 1 receiver on the Dolphins and by a landslide and getting peppered with screens and like clear focal point, right? But devil's advocate argument, which we can make at low ownership, is that no, it was just a product of the scheme. So Miami's receivers, top 2 receivers, Tyreek and Waddle, hadn't combined for over 20 targets in any game all year. Last week, 28. Why was that? I think it was because they faced single high 58% of the time. That was the most they faced all year. Just one of only 3 teams to dare to do this against them since week 2. They faced the lowest rate of single high. Why? Because teams are smart. They know you don't play single high against Tyreek and Waddle, you will get destroyed. And that's exactly what happened. This week, guaranteed to be a very zone heavy, 2 high heavy matchup, which clearly favors Jonnu. And so maybe Jonnu just goes back to the role he had in his previous 3 games where he was breaking slates. He was putting up wide receiver 1 numbers at the tight end position and a 5,400 price tag. And so it's also a good on paper matchup. And so I just like leaning into that, like clear upside, 31, 24, 24, 13 fantasy points. So what if we get, one of those spike weeks again? So I really like Jonnu. I really like him at this ownership. It's a boomer bust play, but one I'm going to personally lean into.
Okay.
You also asked about Jake Ferguson and Dalton Schultz. I think they're solid. Ferguson, like underrated volume, even with Cooper Rush. Decent production, best possible matchup. So I think he's the price is good. Schultz, he's seen at least 6 targets in 6 of his last 9 games. Hasn't really done much outside of his last game, which was a top 5 matchup, but it's another good matchup this week. Miami really vulnerable to tight ends over the last 5 weeks, has been a bit of a tight end funnel all year. So they're fine. I think I like someone no one else is talking about a little bit more.
Okay. Someone no one else is talking about.
Well, one person's talking about them.
Okay. Is it me talking about Travis Kelce?
No. He's fine. I mean, he'll probably find a way into some of my Watson teams just because I'll have a few of them.
Is it Chase Punkwa, who somebody brought up in chat?
No. Matchup's great for him, though. It's Mark Andrews.
Oh, yeah.
Hilo wrote him up as a cash play in his Cash Core article. And so if you're writing up a tight end who's 1% owned in cash, you have to like him for tournaments. I don't like him quite as much as Hilo, but like I think it's interesting. With Charlie Kolar out, we should expect some more decent snap share boost. And Ravens' highest implied point total this slate. He's had a robust red zone role all year, so I think that's interesting. Sash Benia mentions Giants have been the league's toughest matchup for opposing tight ends. That's true. Maybe they're second worst now. Yeah, second worst now. Ultimately, it's just red zone role, high implied point total, small snap share boost. I like it at that price, at that ownership.
All right, yeah, I think I wrote him up as a tournament play. I'm not playing him in cash, but certainly tournament viable. Anything else? Any Sam Laporta 4,400?
I mean, I get it if you want to be touchdown hunting in that game. He's another guy I think has been hurt all year. Don't totally trust.
I ended up including Zach Ertz in my Jaden Daniels stack just because the volume has been so good. The projection's pretty good for Zach Ertz. Any interest?
No, I think you said it. No, Noah Brown bumps his volume.
Yeah.
He's fine.
Jawan Johnson on a New Orleans team that's just missing so many players.
No. I'd rather play Stone Smart.
All right. Anybody else? Or should we make some lineups?
Kate Otten if Evans misses. No.
Oh, yeah. Sounds good. All right. Let's get to making lineups. I already made one during the break, so let's have you lead this one.
Oh, boy. Well, you got to start with Michael Woods, the GOAT. No,
is that for real? Okay.
No, let's do Njoku's out. Let's do a Jameis, Elijah, Judy.
I said I was saving that one for you to be here. Jameis, Elijah, Judy. Boom.
Just to get weird, just to have a little bit of fun. You want to guess who my Chiefs bring back is?
Oh God. No Gray?
No. Browns are easily the second worst defense against the deep ball. So Xavier Worthy is like, this would be like his best spot he's had all year. But no, let's go with the Chiefs defense.
Chiefs defense. Oh God. Okay. That's funny. That is getting weird.
It's also interesting in that, I mean, we might have to take it out, but it's also interesting that Ravens look pretty chalky. So it's a technical pivot. Let us go with Jonnu. And we'll go with Thielen just because he's made us so much money. And he's awesome, and I love him.
There you go. Some good reasons. All right, so 2 running backs and a flex for 62.66 per.
Let's see if we could do Henry.
All right.
No, this is gonna suck probably. Let's do.
If you did Michael Woods triple stack, you could. All
right, screw it. Let's do a Michael Woods triple stack, just for fun.
Let's see how it works.
Yeah, let's hope the min price tight ends all score negative fantasy points and Woods.
Chase Brown.
Yeah, love it. Done.
There you go. There is your. All right, so we got JMO with Judy, Moore, and Michael Woods with against the Chiefs defense. Derrick Henry 1 off, Chase Brown 1 off, Adam Thielen 1 off, Jonnu Smith 1 off. Boom. There you go. Leaves 100 on the table. Beauty.
Yeah. Next one, let's just intentionally make it more correlated. And just a note to the people watching this. This is a Millie lineup, so this is a shit ton of people you're competing against. If you're playing, the daily dollar single entry, it's going to look a little bit more like a cash team. And then all the way up to like the double spy, it looks a lot like a cash team. So embrace variance, go off the wall with a Millie team, but it's different depending on what you're playing in.
That was a funny quote from PW Soccer. Says Scott betting God did not save Jameis from pick sixes. I did love that quote from Jameis after the game.
Yeah.
Deliver me from pick sixes or whatever it was pretty funny. All right. Now a more correlated one, you say. Do you want to do a Burrow stack or I already did Jaden.
Tua, Josh Allen, Burrow.
I would go Burrow for choosing from those groups.
Okay.
Do you want to do double?
Steven says he wants as part of the Millie for the Woods reference. I'll tell you, if we win the Millie, I will give you $50K from my share.
All right. I won't give you any for mine. You can just have
That's right.
50
It's just
Scott's share.
Yeah. It's easy to be selfless when you're talking about a one
theoretical money.
Yeah.
Not for me. Not for me. I'm not doing it. I refuse.
Let's go Chase and Higgins.
Okay.
Wait. Yeah. Chase and Higgins. And then either Ridley or NWI.
All right, we're not giving ourselves a lot of money left over, so probably need to pay down at tight end and defense.
Yeah, min price tight end.
We could do Okonkwo as a secondary bring back, or just go down to I forget who are the Strange.
Yeah, I mean YOLO.
Yeah. Oops. And then defense. Do you have a preference here?
I mean, Browns are honestly fine. They have a great defense. Looks like the Chiefs have regressed.
Yeah. So now we can play two of the sort of chalkier good running back plays.
Chuba.
If we wanted Chuba.
Connor. What does Ridley to NWI get you? Still not to more. Your boy Vidal.
Get my boy Vidal.
No.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to come down on one of these running backs, I think.
Yeah, we could come down to Dowdle.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
Or a Brian Robinson.
Rashad White, if you want to make the swap.
Which one down to Rashad White? Connor?
Yeah.
Then we have 5,600 left over. Unless we want to go back up to Ridley from Westbrook Akita.
Oh, BTJ. Oh, no, he's 58.
We could still move down from Hubbard
Thielen.
to...
You can do Thielen.
Oh, yeah. Then we have 200 left if we want to make any adjustments.
You can go up to the other tight end.
To Smart.
Yeah.
Boom. And then keep Browns over the Titans. Yeah, we don't want Titans in this lineup. All right. So we've got Burrow double with Chase and Higgins, Nick Westbrook-Akine as the bring back, Chuba Hubbard one off, Rashad White one off, Stone Smart one off, Adam Thielen, Browns defense. Book it. There you go. Split in the millie.
Boom. We did it. Now I don't have to give that guy 25K because this one's going to win it.
This is the one that wins instead. Yeah. Sorry about that. All right. That does it. That does it for the show, Scott. That was fun. What else? Where can people find you? What else do you have going on the rest of the weekend?
Yeah, just check me out in Discord. We can hang out. We can commiserate. We can celebrate our victories. We can lament our losses. We can break down Sunday morning news. You can watch my show with John Proctor. So yeah.
All right, and I will be putting out my Sunday Night Football article at Fantasy Points tomorrow. I will be doing my breakdown in the Flannelverse on the Flannelverse YouTube channel tomorrow night, about 85 minutes prior to lock of Sunday Night Football. So those are the next two places you'll be able to find me. Maybe, man, if my voice is like this tomorrow and I have to do a solo show, that's going to be tough. But I will. I'm hoping it'll be better by then. So yeah, I'll be there tomorrow. Good luck to everybody with your lineups. Thanks for hanging out. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the Fantasy Points YouTube channel, etc., etc., and of course, get into the Fantasy Points Discord. A lot of great information being shared in the Fantasy Points Discord. Thanks, everybody. We'll catch you next Saturday.
What?
Why are you shaking your head? You're welcome.